Wolf Children, a film which brings a whole new meaning to the term dog mom. In all seriousness, Mamoru Hosoda's 2012 opus has always been the anime community's go-to recommendation for something even your mother can enjoy. A large reason for this mindset stems from the fact that this movie just doesn't look like your regular big-titty Japanimation fare, choosing instead a delightful pastel color palette, painterly backgrounds, and charmingly simplistic character designs. It's anime your mom can enjoy because it isn't like most anime. So I decided, being both a degenerate furry and weeb, to put that idea to the test. Before we get into all that, I need to be honest with you folks. I've never really liked Wolf Children all that much. I'd constantly see it touted as this resplendent cinematic masterpiece, which is why it was one of the first films I watched when I really started getting into anime at the end of 2014. Seeing people like Every Frame a Painting cover its cinematography gave me the impression that I was in for a ride. But by the time I finished the movie, I failed to see what was so fantastic about it. I certainly admired the craft with which the film was made, and at least on a technical level, there was nothing wrong. It simply just failed to emotionally move me. The second time I tried giving Wolf Children a watch was when my high school anime club decided to do a showing. To a bunch of screaming, pubescent, autistic teenagers who were insufferable to deal with on their own, and impossible to corral into anything remotely representing a pleasant movie-going experience. I hated Anime Club with a passion. Anyway. This time, I fell asleep halfway through, and started to actually develop reasons why I didn't find it as compelling as some others had. You see... Oh shit, this is gonna get personal for a second. The way that people discuss Wolf Children is by suggesting that after you watch it, you're really going to appreciate all your mother went through raising you, especially if you were raised by a single mother. I've never really liked this line of reasoning because I've been raised by a single mother since I was nearly 9 years old. I was able to see firsthand growing up how much of a toll raising 3 kids by herself had on my mother, not at all helped by having to deal with the very distinct growing pains of 3 very different children. I saw how my mother barely had time to grieve after the death of my father before pushing herself to the breaking point for 4 unbearable years without so much as a glimmer of coming to terms with this great loss in her life. The struggle of single motherhood that Wolf Children was supposed to portray in undeniable detail has been my mother's reality for more than a decade. I took offense to the notion that a film which obfuscates its message behind a wall of feel-good, child-friendly conflict could in any sense make me more appreciative of my mother than I already felt, knowing what she's gone through. Another issue I had with the movie was that the portions of it which focused on the trials and tribulations a woman faces when raising 2 children on her own appear much more at the forefront in the early portion of the film, while its latter half spends much more time on the existential crises of 2 half-breed children. At the time, I found both Ame and Yuki to be less than interesting characters, and their mother Hana to be the lifeblood of the film. All that being said, I still wanted to watch the film with my mother because I knew at least she would enjoy it. As I imagine is the case with most mothers, mine has never been one to turn her nose up at the occasionally schmaltzy or cheesy narrative structure. At least not nearly as much as I tend to be, being too cynical for my own good. So after nearly 4 months of begging, I finally convinced her to sit down and give the movie a watch with me. And I was surprised how much not only she enjoyed it, but I did as well. After nearly 4 years of considering it mediocre, Wolf Children finally connected with me and made me love it the same way as so many others. So what changed? The film certainly didn't. The only differences this time were my environment, and I guess some added context I should probably get to. Over the past few months, I've fallen head over heels in love with Makatsu Takagi's score, and I've been using it to sleep as well as relax whenever I'm in the mood for such ventures. How the soundtrack varies from somber piano melodies to quaint and charming folk music to orchestral brilliance is astounding to me. I'm not usually a heavy soundtrack listener, but I think even divorced from the movie's context, I'd still really like this album. In fact, on my previous viewings of the film, I always ended up enjoying the music more than the actual storyline, and if I'm being honest, I still think the strongest aspect of Wolf Children is its score. I will be fair and say that returning to the movie after months of just listening to its soundtrack, it was rewarding to see which tracks undercut which scenes. The way in which Hosoda handles sound specifically is masterful, and beginning to end really makes the film shine brilliantly. Ame and Yuki's arcs in the movie hit harder than I expected as well. I think motherhood is equal parts learning to raise impressionable youths to be upstanding, well-adjusted members of society, as well as learning to let go when those children have grown enough to know what their own paths are in life. The conflict of the second half of Wolf Children is one of an identity crisis split two ways. Ame specifically interests me, choosing his animalistic tendencies and love of nature over fitting into a society which has rejected him in the form of either constant abuse at school or all forms of popular children's media portraying his nature as evil. Breaking down in front of his mother early into the film, Ame asks, "Why are wolves always the bad guys?" And the emotional core of his arc is seeing him become slowly more accepting of the self in which he feels most comfortable. One could read into Ame's arc what they will, as it can be applied to all walks of life that veer from the societally accepted ones. I choose to apply a queer lens to his growth as a character, as that's the interpretation which really made his character click for me, but again, any other interpretation is certainly valid. Yuki's arc takes off in the opposite direction, her being clearly sociable at a young age. It's understandable that a child who had to convince her mother to even let her go to school would be more prone to caring about the perceptions others had about her. Yuki's response to society not accepting her in her entirety is self-denial and conformity, a plan which becomes derailed once a boy from her class becomes interested in her, foibles and all. In an attempt to reject a significant part of herself, she ends up lashing out at someone who tries to understand what she's hiding, or why. While Yuki does end up choosing society at the end of the film, her payoff comes when she's finally able to let go and be honest with someone who won't judge her, and it's beautiful. Hana goes through the most hardships of any character in Wolf Children, but what interested me the most was that despite the fact that her relationship with Okami was fleeting, and took up the least amount of screen time of any arc within the film, how much influence it had on Hana's emotional state throughout. Frequently when raising her children, she regrets not asking him more, not having the foresight to know about everything she'd have to deal with being a widowed mother. In fact, having a widowed mother of my own, I can tell you that this film's representation of them is stunningly accurate. Despite the fact that my father died when I was relatively young, my mother has worked to make sure that his presence has never entirely left us, often telling stories and sharing cute anecdotes to keep him alive in our minds. At least in this movie, that's also the case with Hana, who even after Okami leaves her in the mortal realm, he is never absent from her in spirit. But again, I have to ask myself, what changed since I've last seen this film that made me love it more than all previous viewings? The movie is the same, the soundtrack has always been there, and the thematic weight and growth each of the characters endure has never been lost on me. Is it really just the environment in which I watched Wolf Children that has either hampered or enhanced my enjoyment of it? I'm tempted to say yes. Let it not be understated how fulfilling it is to be able to share a film with someone close to you and have them really enjoy it. When introducing my mother to this movie, I got her to experience all the plot points I had already experienced, but for the first time. Huddled together in a blanket, I got to see her gasp at Okami's death, be enraptured by a woman's struggles with child raising, which closely mirrored her own, and see in fictional children aspects which I imagine she sees in my siblings and I. We both loved the film because it clearly conveyed the lived experiences of ourselves back to us, while we bonded over the activity. I'm so happy she enjoyed the movie, and I had a great time watching it with her. I wouldn't give up that experience for the world. So why not watch a movie you enjoy with somebody you enjoy spending time with? It's a great experience, don't discount it, it's a lot of fun.